Hello, everyone. You're all welcome to the Women in RMEL Meetup for the month of February. My name is Linda Nsifel, and I am the convener of the Women in Research Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning community. So, we are an online community that seeks to accelerate the careers of women in the research monitoring, evaluation, and learning space. But these meetups are open to all who consider themselves as practitioners within RMEL or want to learn more about how to apply RMEL in their careers or just exploring, possibly looking for a job change. Today, we're going to have a very exciting session. But before we dive into our topic for today, I would like us to engage in one or two icebreakers. So the first one is to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from, what you currently do, and of course, don't forget to mention your names. And then secondly, I'll share my agenda and then continue with the second icebreaker, which is very, very straightforward. So just give me a second. Let me just share my screen so that we can all follow. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. Okay, so I'm going to share. Okay, so this is going to be our agenda for today. So the first bit, which we are now on, is the welcome and then the icebreakers. Then we'll have an introduction of our speakers, and then they will dive into the presentation. Then we'll have a time for Q&A, feedback, and then we'll have announcements, and lastly, we'll end the session. Okay, so I hope people are introducing themselves in the chat. Okay, so we have some wonderful intros from Charlene and Bianca. Thank you very much. So please, if you haven't introduced yourself, please do well to do so. I'll carry on with the next icebreaker just to save time. So I would like us to guess the names, or if you know the names, just let us know what the names of these flowers are. So from A to H, there are a variety of flowers from different parts of the world. Some grow very well in temperate areas and some in the tropics, and some can adapt anywhere you plant them. So just in a few minutes, you can type in the chat what you think the names of the plants are, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can also do so. Okay, so we have Daniela, who has mentioned D being tulip. Yes, that's correct. Okay, Bianca says tulip for D. Yes. F is sunflower. Yes. B, well, that's a good guess. Let's see. Okay, so someone got B right. So B is orchid, actually. Okay, so most people are saying F is sunflower. Yes, that's correct. A is marigold. Correct. E, yes, hibiscus. Yes, correct. Okay, so we have how many left? We have F left and G. Okay, so someone has responded to G. Yes, excellent. Water lily. Great. How about C? So we're left with C and F. Sorry, C and H. C and H. So we have F already. Yeah, this is a wonderful icebreaker. Thank you so much, Bianca. Okay, so C and H are the ones we are left with. Yes, so someone's got C right, which is bougainvillea, correct? Yes, Daniela, yes, trumpet flower, yes. So it's actually called angel's trumpet, but yeah, we'll accept trumpet flower. Great. All right. Thank you all for participating. And yes, I see the intros as well. Thank you all for your intros. It's great to have you all here. Okay, so for those who might be interested in knowing where these images came from, you can check these sites. Okay, so I will stop sharing my screen and then I will move on to introducing our speakers for today. So we have three wonderful speakers. So starting with Bianca. So Dr. Bianca Montrosse-Moorhead is an expert in evaluation. She currently serves as a professor of evaluation at the University of Connecticut. Secondly, we have Dr. Daniela Schröter, who is an expert in interdisciplinary evaluation with over 20 years of experience directing evaluation and research initiatives. She currently serves as Associate Professor at Western Michigan University School of Public Affairs and Administration. And then we have our third speaker in the person of Dr. Lyssa Wilson Becho, who is an evaluation scholar, practitioner, and she works as a Principal Research Associate at the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University. Ladies, you're all welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. And they will all be presenting on the topic, the Garden of Evaluation Approaches. So I'm sure some of you will now understand why I selected the icebreaker that I just did. All right, so ladies, over to you. We are your audience.
Great. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. All right. And let me just make sure that everyone can see that. Okay, great. I'm going to try to keep the chat somewhere where I can maybe try to follow it. Wow, that was a lot of thumbs up, Lyssa. All of a sudden it exploded. All right, so welcome and hello to everyone joining us virtually. We are excited to be here with you all today and talk about the Garden of Evaluation Approaches. After we introduce ourselves, actually, we've already done that, so I may do that a little more quickly. And we're going to give you a bit of background. Then we're going to give an overview of the Garden of Evaluation Approaches and some examples of how we've used this framework for classifying approaches in our practice and how other practitioners have used it and those kinds of things. We are going to leave time for questions at the end of our time together because we really want to hear from you. What do you think about the garden? How might you use it in your work? Those kinds of things. So just to foreshadow some of that. All right. We also like icebreakers. And so we wanted to start off with a question for you all to sort of get us in the mindset of thinking about gardens and how they might apply to evaluation. So in the chat box, I invite you to please share what your favorite garden, park, or natural space is and why. And as you are typing in the chat, I'll just share that one of my favorite places is Central Park in New York City. And I'm lucky enough that I live just a couple of hours from New York City, so I can get there on a weekend, for instance. And no matter the time of the year, I love walking through the park and exploring all that it has to offer. It offers different things depending on the time of the year, and it's just one of my favorite places. So just go ahead and share in the chat what your favorite garden, park, or natural space is and why. So I see Lyssa has shared one of my favorite natural spaces is a cedar forest in the state of Vermont, which is in the northeast of the United States. Thanks, Lyssa. I appreciate that. And then I see our host has shared I like the Aburi Gardens based in the eastern region of Ghana. Great. Thank you. Anyone else like to share? Daniela, my parents' backyard in Germany. On the farm, right? Is this right? Yeah. So Daniela grew up on a farm. So yeah, that's her parents' favorite. Yeah, so continue, to share in the chat. And, we really appreciate anyone, sharing and sort of helping us sort of, get in this garden framework. So, as mentioned, this is a collaborative effort between Daniela, Lyssa, and myself. And since we've already been introduced, I'm just going to sort of skip this introduction and so that we can keep moving on. So, our work together on the garden grew out of four areas of motivation, which you see on this slide. We are all evaluation educators in some capacity. We also have all continued to engage in evaluation practice. So we all do evaluation studies in a variety of contexts. We are also all engaged in research on evaluation, or ROE for short. And this includes ROE around how and why evaluation approaches, theories, and models are used in practice. And so when we looked at the existing scholarship, we wanted to develop something that was practical and straightforward for those learning about evaluation approaches and how to choose the approach that's right for a particular evaluation. We wanted to develop something that acknowledged our experience of evaluation approaches becoming tools that we use to think with about practice rather than tools that prescribe our practice. So that is something really important to understand about our framework. Um, and um, and so now I'm going to move on to introducing the garden. So why a garden? Okay. We wish we could tell you that it's because one of us on here is an expert gardener, but the fact of the matter is we are not. In fact, this is a very, very sad looking photo of my own raised garden bed from last summer, and as you can see, it's very sad. We are not real gardeners in life. But we know that there are a lot of approaches to evaluation out there, more than you even realize. And each brings a set of perspectives, values, and guidance to the work, right? And so you see some of these on this slide. We also know that evaluation is not a one size fits all kind of activity, right? Different lenses offer unique perspectives, shaping what questions we ask, how we gather, interpret, and use information, and so on. And so we were interested in trying to create something that could help others see the similarities and differences among approaches. That made more transparent the kinds of decisions we make by adopting a particular approach, and that might help all of us be a little more creative and a little more inspired in our practice. Many existing visualizations and classifications exist. You see some examples on the screen. And they really illustrate the creativity in the field and in the discipline, right? And they help us in all kinds of ways. So, for example, some of them help us facilitate learning about the evolution and development of approaches. Some help us focus on evaluation questions and criteria and understanding that. Others help us illustrate approaches that have been adapted, adopted, or modified, and so on. And so our visualization is intended to illustrate the diversity of evaluation approaches to guide evaluators in understanding, selecting, and integrating different approaches based on one's field applications to enhance stakeholder engagement and decision making. Now, the flower is not where we started. In fact, we began by identifying characteristics of evaluation approaches and rating each approach on different dimensions. We first visualize these approaches with a radar chart. And again, you see examples of some of these early iterations on the slide. But when we put them side by side, it just didn't work. Visually, you could see that the approaches were different overall, but it was really hard to see differences in each dimension. And so in our conversations, Daniela kept coming back to this idea of an ecosystem metaphor. And she kept saying, sort of jokingly, maybe there's a seed falling from the evaluation theory tree and it creates a flower that continues to grow and evolve. And so later on, when she saw the radar charts, she immediately thought of visualizing the dimensions as flower petals instead. Lyssa, who is an amazing artist among us, designed the first set of flowers. And when we saw it, we knew that it would work for what we were trying to do, and things grew from there. The result is the garden of evaluation approaches. We chose an ecosystem metaphor because we wanted to illustrate the current state of approaches while enabling the inclusion of new approaches, providing opportunities for scholarship for approaches to evolve through refinement and continued scholarship, and allowing for comparison between approaches. So today, Lyssa is going to delve into the garden and illustrate the key dimensions of the flowers. Daniela is going to discuss the practical applications of the framework. And at the end, we'll show you how you can access a range of resources we have created and provided for free to the evaluation community around this tool. So, Lyssa, over to you.
Thanks, Bianca. So, what is this garden? Well, it's a visual framework that maps and compares diverse evaluation approaches, illustrating their philosophical foundations, their methodological orientations, and key aspects of practice. The garden helps evaluators make intentional, informed, and context-specific choices. It includes visual representations of approaches across 11 dimensions of practice, along with supplementary information to provide deeper insight into each approach. So, building this garden of evaluation approaches has been quite the adventure, and the three of us have had quite some fun bringing it to life. We designed each element of the garden carefully to capture the diversity of evaluation approaches in a meaningful way. So let's start with the first key feature, the color of the flower. So in this garden, the color of each flower isn't just for aesthetics, it's actually representing the philosophical foundation or worldview of that approach. So just like in nature, every color has its meaning. Now at the center of each flower, there is a circle with a unique pattern. And again, these aren't just decorative, but instead they represent the methodological preferences of each approach. So whether an approach leans towards quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods, the pattern helps distinguish how it structures and interprets data. So between the color and the pattern, each flower tells a deeper story about the approach that it represents. It's like a botanical guide to evaluation, one that helps us see the uniqueness of each approach and how they connect with the broader landscape. The remaining dimensions include 8 flower petals. So each of these dimensions are unique, are elements that we've found set evaluation approaches apart from other research methods or approaches to inquiry. So with various possible combinations, these dimensions distinguish evaluation approaches from one another and from other forms of inquiry. So if we look at these petals, the first two are values and valuing. So for values, we ask how much the approach helps us in identifying and incorporating values in an evaluation. For valuing, we examine if and how the approach guides us in determining the merit, worth, or significance, and whether that process is more implicit or explicit. You'll notice that some of these petals are missing sometimes, which might cause a whole discussion in evaluation. The next petal we have is activism for social justice. So this dimension looks at how much an approach encourages explicit action in support of a cause, and whether it positions advocacy or activism as a central goal for the evaluation. The next dimension is context. So here we're examining how much an approach guides evaluators in considering the role of context within an evaluation, whether that means cultural, social, political, or environmental factors that shape the process and findings. Promoting use is the next dimension. So here we assess how much an approach provides guidance for ensuring that evaluation findings are not just collected, but actually applied, whether that's for decision making, policy changes, or improving a program. The next two dimensions focus on the engagement in the evaluation process. So the breadth looks at who should be involved. Does the approach provide guidance on including different interest holders? And depth examines how they're involved. What role do evaluation contributors play in shaping that evaluation? The final dimension is power dynamics in decision making. So here we examine to what extent the approach guides who is involved in the evaluation decision making and how that power is distributed among these decision makers. So we gave these approaches numeric ratings corresponding to where they fell along each of the 8 petals. These ratings are based on a rubric that we developed, and the length of the petals can range from 0 to 3. So a 0 would indicate a missing petal, meaning that there's nothing yet written about that petal dimension. And then the numeric values of 1, 2, or 3 are ordinal within the definition of that petal. So pulling these visual elements together, a garden of evaluation begins to grow. Something we do want to call out here is that these flowers are intended to map out evaluation approaches, not to rank or judge them. So bigger petals don't mean better, and perfectly balanced petals aren't really the goal either, because after all, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or in our case, the written literature. So let's resist the temptation to judge them in that way. And remember, evaluation isn't a one size fits all kind of garden. The best approach for one evaluation may not bloom as beautifully in another. So here it is. This is the garden as it's grown since its original publication in the American Journal of Evaluation and the Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation. So this expanded version of the garden adds 8 new flowers to our original 7, bringing the total to 15 approaches mapped so far. Each flower follows the shared structure that we just discussed, yet you'll see no 2 are alike. The length of each petal highlights the emphasis an approach places on the different dimensions, such as values, context, or power dynamics. And then the color distinguishes the philosophical paradigms, ranging from post-positivist to transformative and indigenous approaches. And then we have the pattern in the center, which is indicating whether an approach lends towards quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. So together, these flowers illustrate both the diversity and the interconnectedness of evaluation approaches. The garden is really designed to be flexible, helping evaluators compare, adapt, and select approaches that best fit their specific contexts and needs. So next, I'm going to invite Daniela to tell us more about the resources behind each of these flowers.
So what's behind each of these flowers? Each of the flowers is backed by a handout. You can access the handout through our Vita or the Open Science Framework page. So you can create your own login into the Open Science Framework and get access to all the information for free. If you are on the main OSF page, you'll want to scroll through the component part to see everything we have posted so far, and that's located on the right side. Once you're on a handout page, you look under the Files section for the file that you want and click on it to open the handout. And that actually just changed in last week, pretty much. Where the location is. But nowadays, so you click on top on the file, and then you will have access to the handout materials. To illustrate our handout for this session, we're using the ICE for GEMS approach. ICE for GEMS stands for Inclusive Systemic Evaluation of Gender Equality, Environments, and Marginalized Voices. It's been developed by the UN Women, and we thought it's a really interesting approach. Remember, although this flower is fully grown and balanced with ratings of 3 on all petals, it does not present a better approach than any other with less balanced petals. Instead, different approaches would be chosen based on the purpose of the evaluation. Each handout begins with an introduction, the flower legend, and a citation for the handout. Then follows a table. And this table includes 3 key pieces of information: the petal dimensions, our assigned ratings, and the evidence supporting that rating. So you may want to note a few things there. The dimensions column includes the guiding question for each dimension and a brief definition to clarify what it represents. And then the evidence column contains information from published sources that justified the rating we assigned. So we understand there may be development over the years, so maybe things change, but this is the evidence that supports that rating. The table is followed by 2 new elements, including things that have been evaluated with the approach and the timing of the evaluation. We call it things that have been evaluated because there are so many different possibilities, from programs to projects to policies to personnel to performance, etc. The timing refers to the evaluation life cycle in which the approach has been used as documented in the literature. Then we provide a high-level overview of the steps for implementing each approach and practice, and that is directly derived from the literature. And after the steps, we go into the philosophical orientation of the approach, which is our evidence for the color of the flower, but also the pattern in the center of the flower. That discussion is followed by a subset of definitions. We had a lot of confusion, so different people will take the lead on developing each handout. And then when we review each other's handout, we are like, so what does this mean, right? There's all this language. So we started hyperlinking key terms throughout the handout, and these terms illustrate the multidisciplinary nature of evaluation, depending on where specific literature is coming from. As the evaluators tend to use different language in different ways, these definitions are supposed to help us understand each approach better and make it more applicable for novel evaluators. And then, as expected in academia, the handouts wrap up with references because no work is complete without citing its roots. These references include the sources we drew from in creating the handout and also point you to more places where you can dig deeper into each approach. And just like a thriving garden, our conversations have been cross-pollinating ideas, sparking new insights, and nurturing the growth of meaningful evaluation practices. So now Bianca will show you how we and others have used this garden framework in our practice.
Thank you, Daniela. Okay, so now we've explored the garden of evaluation approaches. And before I show you how we and others have used the garden, let's take a moment to reflect. So again, we'd like to be interactive here. So the question we have for you is, how might you use the garden framework in your own evaluation work? Take a moment to share your thoughts in the chat. So you could drop a quick idea. Maybe it's a specific application, a new perspective, or even a question about how this might fit into your work. Heads up, I'll probably read a few responses out loud to highlight some of the ideas shared, but we're all really looking forward to hearing how you see the garden growing in your own practice. So Laura says, hi, Laura. I'm interested to see how the garden can be used to help align fitting design analysis with research questions. It's a great question. And we'll maybe tackle that and save it for the end, because part of what we're going to show is some uses around that. Yeah. Our host, our wonderful host, says possibly for impact analysis work. Yeah, so we can talk about, we do have some approaches mapped, that the places in which they've been used, or the kinds of questions that they're really interested in, are impact kinds of questions, as opposed to other kinds of questions we might ask, like process kinds of questions, or implementation, or those kinds of things. So when we get to the next version of the flowers, we'll point that out for you. So these, I think, are really good ideas and ways to think about how you begin to engage with the garden. If you think of more ideas, please continue to put them in the chat. You can also reach out to us. We love to chat with others about this work. Okay, so a couple of examples to just show you how folks have taken this and really run with it. So the garden is being actively applied in evaluation practice by evaluation practitioners. So for example, Julian King used the garden framework to compare social return on investment, or SROI, and cost benefit analysis, or CBA. And through this comparison, he uncovered key differences between the two approaches and highlighted why mixing CBA or SROI and other approaches can enhance evaluation. The flowers you see on this slide illustrate how these approaches map within the garden, visually showing their unique strengths and limitations. And the work of Julian demonstrates how the garden can serve as both an analytical tool and a guide for making more informed evaluation decisions. Julian has actually shared more about this on LinkedIn, including an exploration of what he calls the caterpillar. So, folks aren't just taking our framework as is, they're also being creative with it. And so he added a caterpillar, which is why you see some bites out of flowers on here, and he explains why. And so for those interested, we encourage you to check out his article, and I'm going to pop that in the chat. All right. The Garden of Evaluation Approaches is also not just a framework for analyzing existing models. It's also a tool for self-reflection and customization for practitioners. So in a recent workshop at the European Evaluation Society, Daniela, Lyssa, and I tested an activity where participants actually created their own flowers. They reflected on their personal values, their perspectives, and priorities for each dimension of evaluation, such as engagement, context, power dynamics, things like that, to design a flower that represents their own unique evaluation approach. That is the way they want to and do practice evaluation. This process encouraged practitioners to think critically about the implicit choices they make when designing evaluations and to visualize their own practice in a new way. And you see that, these are participants, and you see their flowers actually in this photo. And this activity also sparked really rich discussions about how different evaluation philosophies shape our work and decision making. And our thinking behind this activity is this: by creating your own flower, you're not just mapping existing approaches. You're engaging in a creative and reflective process to define what evaluation means and looks like in your own context, in your own work. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Lyssa.
Thanks, Bianca. So every visualization has its benefits and limitations. So Bianca has actually written about how visualizations bring some things into focus while putting other things in the background. So, of course, ours does as well. So one of the benefits that we want to highlight about the garden evaluation approaches is that its emphasis on mapping approaches on multiple dimensions. And in doing so, it provides a way to promote conversation and thinking about the similarities and differences among approaches, as well as the intentional mixing of approaches in evaluation. For example, what would it look like to combine elements of fourth generation evaluation with elements of practical participatory evaluation? We know from research on evaluation practice that evaluation practitioners rarely use just a single evaluation approach, but instead weave elements of various approaches together. The garden visualization helps us be more intentional about pulling these approaches together. Another benefit is that each of the flowers in the garden is backed by a detailed handout, just like Daniela walked you through. So these handouts really make visible the empirical mixed method analysis that led to what each flower looks like. Each petal rating is justified using direct quotes from the original literature. And these handouts, along with all of our other resources, are open access and freely available online. There are also limitations, of course. So first, it takes time to grow a garden. So you'll notice that not all approaches are mapped yet, although we are continuing to do so. Second, the garden also reflects the complexity of practice, meaning that it can take some time for someone to understand the structure of the garden in order to use it in their practice. Third, we also know that there are more characteristics of evaluation approaches that could be integrated into the garden. For example, we're currently engaged in conversation about how to adequately represent context and culture in the garden. Finally, we also acknowledge our own positionality and values that we bring to this work. We actively reflect on how our social positions and perspectives influences what shows up in the garden and what doesn't. We have tried to ensure the evaluation approaches from various worldviews, countries, and cultures are represented in the garden. However, a garden created by others would inevitably look different than ours. So I'm going to turn things over to Daniela to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Lyssa. So, as we wrap up our discussion, let's dig into what makes the Garden of Evaluation approaches such a powerful tool for practice. So, first, evaluation approaches are as diverse as the flowers in a garden. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. Just like different plants thrive in different conditions, the approach you choose should be carefully selected based on your context, purpose, and participants. Like a thriving garden, a thriving evaluation practice requires thoughtfulness, adaptability, and care. Second, the garden is here to help you navigate the diversity. It's a tool to compare and cultivate different approaches, giving you a straightforward way to see similarities and differences. Instead of guessing which approach to use, you can make intentional and informed choices, whether you're evaluating a program, designing a study, or guiding a team. But we don't just observe gardens, we also get our hands dirty. This framework encourages mixing and experimenting. Just like companions planting helps a garden flourish, blending evaluation approaches can create a richer and more meaningful insights. The garden also makes evaluation more accessible and engaging. Whether you're working with stakeholders, funders, or colleagues, it provides a shared language and visual way to discuss evaluation choices. And finally, the garden is an invitation to grow, to experiment, reflect, and cultivate your own evaluation philosophy. Designing your evaluation flower allows you to get your hands in the soil, exploring what matters most in your practice, and making evaluation more personal, dynamic, and alive. So, as you step away from today's session, we encourage you to dig in, experiment, and cultivate your own approach. We wonder, what seeds will you plant in your evaluation work? So thank you very much for joining us and engaging in discussion with us. We're hoping the ideas we shared about diversity of evaluation approaches are useful for you. And we hope we inspire creativity, but also inclusivity, spark new insights and applications in your work. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any follow-up questions, ideas, or would like to continue this conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. You have our contact information right there, and we're happy to engage in discussions about this with you. Thank you, and we hope you leave today feeling inspired and ready to cultivate new possibilities in your own evaluation work. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. All right, so we have time for questions, comments, feedback. So you can unmute and ask Bianca, Lyssa, or Daniela, or you can also write your questions or your contributions in the chat window. Okay, so we have a comment from Christine. She said, great presentation, thanks. And then another comment from Fulia, who said, thanks for the presentation. Right.
I know we had some questions earlier, so maybe we could go back to them, and maybe we'll start with Laura's, and then kind of go from there. So Laura, again, thank you for your question about, how to think about using the garden and its intersection with fitting design, analysis, research questions, things like that. And I see you've come online. I don't know if you want to say more about that.
No, just to say hi and thank you. And I also was going to plant a seed in the whole metaphor situation here too. And this is my first time joining one of these women in RMEL meetings. And so I'm not familiar with the group, but I know and like you guys, which is why I showed up. But I'd love to hear, in addition to talking about your research and its implications for how we do work, if someone, if it's even appropriate, wants to share some information about this community. I feel like we're all in a place where it's nice to have a warm community right now. So I'd like to know more.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And thanks for coming. Yeah. So what I'll just share related to your question is it's one we're actually thinking about. And and we tend to try things out before we put it out. And, we, as you know, so like the EES workshop, Daniela and I are teaching courses this semester where we're actually using the garden. One of the ways in which I'm testing sort of, a new resource, or a new way to sort of think about things, right, is how do we make sure that there's a clear integration or those kinds of things around what is your evaluation question or set of evaluation questions, because so often we have a set of things that we're a set of questions. And then how do you expand really the center petal, which is the methodology, right? It represents the methodology that one's using. How do you then expand that in a way that people understand and can sort of talk about? And so, this work is ongoing work. It is, Lyssa, Danielle, and I talk about how this is probably going to be, this is our careers, right? So we're going to be talking about this for a long time and sort of building it out. But it is something that we have been thinking about and that others have asked this very, I think, thoughtful question. And so we're trying to be responsive to it, but also, play around with some ways to think about that, because we try to put things out there that we've maybe at least worked out some of the initial kinks, just, the first time you start to do some of that. So thanks, Laura.
All right. We still have time. Yes,
so
please go ahead.
when you're looking at those handouts, you will see some approaches provide much more detail, right? So for example, if you have a missing petal, that means that the people that wrote about this approach haven't talked about that approach, right? You will also see that some approaches provide a lot of methodological guidance, while others just say, well, apply social science research methods or use a particular design or collect this type of data. So there is a lot of variety within those approaches. And that's another question we often get. Why do you go to approaches rather than going to these highly developed models that have been widely used, right? So why did we not classify utilization focused evaluation, for example, right? So at this time, which is widely used, right? What we really want to accomplish is to get this diversity. So you will see we have Made in Africa as part categorized. We also have realist evaluation classified, which is not very common, like very commonly talked about in my context within the US. It would usually be theory-driven evaluation, right? So different contexts often demand different types of approaches. You'll also see right now there's a lot of yellow, and that some of that is related to us doing work that is very use-oriented, and those are all use-oriented approaches, and some of them are favored in certain industries that we happen to work with. So there is so much there, but most of us are very limited in the number of approaches we are well aware of, that we're familiar with. Oftentimes we have one or two evaluation classes where we get introduced to one or two approaches, but this is an effort to really bring in the wide range of different ways people think about evaluation to make it accessible to everyone and say, oh, there's so much more than that textbook talked about, right?
To build
Great. Thank you so much for your
solution.
responses.
Oh,
Hello?
Lyssa, you cut out for a second. I don't know if
Oh,
you
sorry
shared
about
something
that.
else.
Yeah.
It's
Oh yeah,
okay.
I was just gonna say, building on what Daniela said, one of my favorite implications of the garden is the possibility to expand your imagination around what is possible within evaluation. Sometimes we see practitioners who fall into evaluation who have no idea that there are any evaluation specific approaches out there for them. Really, they're just using research methods and approaches. And then you also have from the other end students who go through graduate programs and introduced to these approaches as if they are hard and fast steps that people follow in practice. And that's just not how evaluations in real life work. So I really appreciate that this garden helps you think through and use these approaches as tools for making decisions, for planning evaluations, for really making sure that you are matching the approach and how it makes those decisions, how it includes different people and power structures with the context that you're working in. Um, so I think that's really powerful as well.
Great. I think Laura has comments. So she said, I appreciate how you have really leveraged visualization, size, color, texture to capture multiple complex dimensions. Yeah. Yeah, and maybe just following up on that, I'm just curious to know what informed your decision on the choice of the colors, like the color coding, and also if there's room to like yeah, to introduce new colors. Of course, they should have significance, but yeah, maybe if you can touch on that.
So the colors that we're using right now, each of them relate to the different world views that approaches really promote. So the colors originally were really we thought about like having multiple colors across the color spectrum, but also making sure that the contrast was different enough between the colors to account for those who have different types of color blindness. Also thinking about if these papers were printed in black and white, could you still tell the difference between them? But actually, when we were at the European Evaluation Society conference, we had a few conversations around the emotional signals that different colors give off, and we hadn't quite thought about that. And so I think that that's something that we would love to continue to think about, which of course is different in every culture, every country, right? And so really looking into more about color theory to say, just like we were saying of the size of the petals, sometimes people bring judgments to what that means. Really thinking through, like, is there other meanings that the colors are actually bringing that we were not originally aware of or didn't think of?
Yeah, and to add to what Lyssa shared, you do see a little bit of the evolution of colors. So we actually originally, again, early on in the work, I don't even know if this is public or not, but we originally just had the yellow, the red, and the purple because those were the paradigms or worldviews of the approaches that we were reading. But again, we've tried to be inclusive about approaches that take different stances, right? And that are also were developed in other contexts besides North America and Europe, right? Like we tried to be really intentional in how what flowers we're mapping and that we're continuing to map. And so once we got into reading around and reading about the approaches in terms of the Made in Africa and Nation to Nation, which is an approach that does come out of North America, but a particular indigenous community in North America. We realized, like, obviously, this is a completely different worldview, and we needed to represent that. And so you actually, it's a little bit of the background story of even as we've been doing this, right? Sort of, we have realized along the way, oh, we need another color for this, and I can't imagine that we won't continue to take that approach, right? As we continue to read, because there are a lot of approaches out there. And so if we really hit that, then we think about that and we integrate it into the next version.
Yeah, following up on that, you'll also see traditionally most people here have been using the evaluation tree. And the evaluation tree really locates approaches based on their primary point of view, I guess, right? So, but as we are classifying these approaches, we see that we would actually list a different paradigm then so the our approach may not be located on the same branch, right? So if you have, for example, something like the success case method is traditionally classified under training evaluation on the methods branch, but when you really look into the approach, it is not a post-positivist approach. It is really a pragmatist approach, right? While most post-positivist approaches really center around method and methodology very specifically. So the way in which the color really shows us about the way in which evaluation is practiced based on the way it's been written about and the way in which these approaches have been used. So we feel like it also allows us to really reflect on these different world views that we have about evaluation, right? And how do we practice evaluation in different environments for different organizations, for different purposes, for different contexts, right? And what in what level of like the life cycle, right? Is this a young program versus a well-established program? Is it a policy? Is it a practice, right? So all these questions go into, well, what is actually my best way to look at this, right?
Right. Thank you. Thank you all for your responses. Very informative and yeah, very elaborate explanations as well. Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, we are doing well on time. But if there's maybe one burning question or a comment from the audience or the participants. Otherwise, if not, maybe just your final words, starting with you, Bianca, and then we can move to Lyssa and then Daniela.
Yeah, I just want to thank you so much for the invitation. And I want to echo what Laura shared. It's it's just great to be in community with other women who are in this space, and so really we're just really grateful for the opportunity to connect, and please don't be shy about reaching out. We'd love to chat. Yeah.
Absolutely. I echo that as well. And just as a reminder that everything we have done around this project, we have really intentionally made open access. So all of the handouts you've seen today, but we have also made any of the publications around this freely available as well. And those are all linked at that tiny URL you see on the screen. So thank you, everyone.
Mhm. Also, thank you, everyone. It's a wonderful opportunity to, you know, connect with women all over the world, and not just women without in our own backyard, right? And we really hope that we will hear from you and learn from you, and that you provide some very critical feedback as well, because that's how we, push ideas around. That's how we grow, and this is how we continue learning. I think it takes a village, or like it takes a world of of villages, right, to learn from each other. And I really would love to see what you all are doing.
Amazing. Thank you all for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you talk about the great work you're doing, and we're wishing you the best for the expansion of this work. And we hope that it would make waves around the world as well. All right, so participants, we are almost at the end of our meeting today. So I've shared some links in the chat. So the first link is to provide feedback on today's session. Let us know what you enjoyed about the session, and you're also welcome to recommend topics for subsequent meetups. And then you're also welcome to follow Women in RMEL on X and LinkedIn. So I've shared the links in there in the chat. And then you can also visit our YouTube channel where you can go back and have a look at the previous sessions that we've had. And today's session will be uploaded there as well. So you can recap and just play back and learn and relearn, of course, and share with others what you've learned as well. So on this note, I would like to draw down the curtain of our meetup. Thank you very much, Bianca, Lyssa, and Daniela for making time to be with us. Hopefully we'll invite you another time to share more about your work. And hopefully by then, maybe we'll have some testimonials of how people are applying the approaches in their work. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day and a happy end to your week. Bye.
Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.